Thank you for watching this virtual lecture event hosted by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security and international affairs. We have 5 master's degree programs, 18 certificates of study, and a new doctoral program. We also offer the opportunity to take a single course without having to pay an entire semester's worth of tuition cost. One can also audit such a course at a much less cost. If you're interested in learning more about us, please visit iwp.edu. This evening, Ms. Bella Grabowski will be giving our 10th annual Kosciuszko Chair Military Lecture in honor of General Walter Jajko. Ms. Grabowski is a student at the Institute of World Politics. She is currently pursuing a master's in Statecraft and National Security Affairs with a concentration in intelligence. Given her native Polish background, Ms. Grabowski is specializing in Eastern European geopolitics. Prior to her studies at the Institute of World Politics, Ms. Grabowski has spent time in the U.S. Embassy in London, working at the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and has also lived in Argentina and Italy. Ms. Grabowski completed her undergraduate studies in Economics and Hispanic Studies at Pepperdine University. She also received a certificate in conflict management with a concentration in world religions from the Straus Institute for Dispute Resolution. Ms. Grabowski, welcome, and thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. As Hannah said, my name is Bella Grabowski, and I'm a current student at the Institute of World Politics, pursuing a master's in Statecraft and National Security Affairs. Thank you for everybody joining us during this Kosciuszko Chair and General Jajko lecture. I feel incredibly honored to be a part of this. For me personally, it has been truly an amazing opportunity to be able to present on a topic that I've been passionate about ever since I can remember. But before I dive into it, I would like to provide a little bit more context. My father came to the United States when he was 18 years old. He was one of the lucky ones that was able to pursue the American dream as he escaped the Soviet bloc communist regime in Poland during the 80s. His experience that definitely consisted of a series of hardships, but most importantly, my family instilled Polish values and tradition for my sisters and I. When I was growing up, especially when I was going to Polish school in the Chicago suburbs on a Saturday, I didn't appreciate this as much as I should have. America is founded on the fact that it's truly a melting pot, not only a melting pot, but most importantly, a land of opportunity. The community that makes up America has been writing history prior to the year 1776. Before historical documentation, humans relied on the classic and what I would like to call Homeric oral tradition. This consisted of gathering as a community, exchanging observations, and discussing findings from day-to-day activities and sharing family stories. It was a natural occurrence which humans experienced. Over time, these stories were passed down generation to generation. This oral tradition ultimately became a cultural, what I would like to call cultural identifier, and eventually a cultural reality, as well as commonality amongst those who shared that same appreciation towards similar event or occurrence, therefore providing for a comfortable environment as well as a sense of common identity. To put it simply, these stories ultimately created milestones, or what I would like to coin as staple moments in history that identified with a group of individuals, therefore forming a community and ultimately a culture. For example, in the United States, Americans may say that the historical events that define Americans would include the Revolution, the Civil War, or the Second World War. These periods of time in a culture serve as identifiers that others in this nation come together and form an American identity. Periods of conflict and struggle for a country oftentimes gives its community the opportunity to reevaluate reality in order to come together for a common cause. Ultimately, once overcome, the battle is won and the victory is quote-unquote worn by its citizens, which ultimately serves as what I would like to call a figurative medal of patriotic valor. This serves as a symbol, labeling the struggle the nation experienced as a defining moment for the country and its citizens, as opposed to looking at the occurrence in the opposite manner. With that being said, the approach to conflict, regardless of the country, is powerful. It can contribute to the cultural identity of the nation, as well as drive the agenda and the approach to any militarily and diplomatically driven initiative. In the case of cultural identity, romanticism is oftentimes used as a variable in uniting a country by emphasizing the struggle and ultimately providing a sense of hope to the nation's people. The ideology stems from the idea of romantic militarism. It exposes the persistence, strength, power, as well as resilience that many like to commonly identify with. Although these pivotal moments vary from culture to culture, The ideology is utilized similarly in that the struggles a nation or a community faces at a certain point in their history can be romanticized. The theory behind doing so would include exposing and highlighting a nation's triumph over fear. A hardship could bring a country out of times of helplessness. For example, the World Wars brought the United States to common ground, uniting its people during times of uncertainty. The commonalities that individuals share culturally infiltrate into their geopolitical landscape, meaning that naturally the strategy that is utilized by certain individuals stem from one's sense of culture as it may pertain to the community's defining moments reflected in their history. Every country has defining moments. The United States is a relatively young country, and the milestone mentioned in reference to the young nation date back to the 1700s. However, other countries have documentation dating as far back as AD 965, which in Poland's case was during the rule of King Mieszko I. The Polish culture holds its well-documented history to a very high regard. A staple moment that identifies with many Poles is the time of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, specifically the peak of the Polish Hussars, or as many like to say, the Husaria. The influence of the Polish Hussars stretched far and wide. Many regarded them as the best cavalry in Europe at the time. To this day, just like the Americans do in reference to the American Revolution, Poles, whether it's the baker in the small village outside of Szczecin or the CEO of Maspex, they all carry the Husaria to a very high regard, and to the point that they culturally recognize in their version of the figurative Medal of Patriotic Valor previously mentioned. This proves that the Polish Hussars serve as a uniting source of identity for Poles. Over the course of history, the Polish culture has strategically presented the Husaria as a source of hope in order to unite and remedy the community during times of struggle through romanticizing the famed winged cavalry. The Hussar originated in Serbia towards the end of the 14th century, and by the 15th century, the Husaria made their way into Poland as mercenaries, or Radzovia. The term Hussar itself has contrived connections with both the Hungarian hus, meaning 20, but also gusar, which is a Slavonic word meaning bandit. Both of those roots provide for a good context as to how it pertains to the nature of the Husaria, meaning they were a small, light cavalry and served as a cheap alternative to what used to be traditional and very expansive militaries of the time. The Husaria carried a variety of weapons, including a lance that was used with 2 swords, a bow, an arrow, as well as 2 pistols and a short carbine. In addition to their unique weaponry, the Hussars were also well known for raising their own horses. They were among one of the finest in Europe, and to the point that laws were passed by the Commonwealth in order to prevent their export and preserve their military value and rarity. Until the middle of the 17th century, the Polish cavalry was divided into 2 main classes, the Hussars and the Cossacks. Within those 2, the cavalry was further divided into what was called the chorągiew in Polish, or in English, banners, that are essentially equivalent to what would one associate with an army unit present day. The chorągiew husarska is often referred to as the banner of the winged hussars. This is due to the distinguishable wings that they would wear on their armor. The symbolism is a reference to their origins in Serbia. The theories on the functions and strategy behind wearing the wings have varied over the course of history. There's speculation that the feathers were used as a defense against sword cuts during battle, while others theorize that the wings were used as a form of psychological warfare, in that the noise the wings would make during battle would startle enemies' horses. There's also theory that claiming that they were purely used for the visual impact. In addition to the wings, the Husaria wore helmets, thick steel breastplates, and shoulder and arm guards. As at times, some officers would sport the skin of a tiger or leopard as a cloak. These were used to startle enemies' horses, which the Husaria were greatly known for. The military dress worn by the Hussars was meant to give an impression of splendor and wealth. There was a sense of great nobility in this small cavalry banner. Many soldiers would display their wealth through studding their helmets or breastplates with gold or precious stones. Harnesses, saddles, and horse cloths were oftentimes embroidered and embellished with gold or gems as well. The Husaria is most famously known for the utilization of all of those variables, as well as applying them on the battlefield. The Polish army at the time was raised by various methods at the height of the Commonwealth. There have been claims made by kings and even present-day military historians naming the Husaria as one of the most spectacular group of soldiers that history has ever seen. They were quick and utilized a cavalry style referred to as bands of robbers. The father of Polish military science, Hetman Jan Tarnowski, published a book in 1558 where he elaborated on the old Hussite charging tactics. The men would utilize their geographical surroundings by assembling accordingly in a loose square formation. That square formation was tactical in that it would also serve as a mobile fortress. In battle, the Husaria would start at a slow pace before reaching its highest pace only right before making contact with the enemy. This tactic proved its successes during the Battle of Vienna and earned the Hussars the reputation that was symbolically unprecedented. One of the most notorious battles fought by the Hussars is the Battle of Vienna. The victory over the Ottoman Empire proved that there was meaning and strategy behind the attack. The cavalry utilized their tactics on the field in conjunction with expressing the strategic symbolism behind their fighting tactics that later contributed to the romanticism of the Hussars during the period of the three partitions of Poland. At the time of the Battle of Vienna, the Ottoman Empire was expanding. As Ottomans continued to herald their era of expansion, presenting themselves as unstoppable, capturing the city of Vienna was their strategic aspiration. The Ottomans made their way into Europe, spreading their influence and providing military assistance to non-Catholic minorities with the hope of gaining more territory and influence. After a 2-month-long invasion by the Turks in Vienna, Polish King Jan Sobieski responded by joining forces with the Holy Roman Empire in what he saw as not purely a territorial war, but also a war on religion. On the march to Vienna, Sobieski stopped at the Blessed Virgin Shrine in Częstochowa to pray, exposing his intentions as well as entrusting his successes in Our Lady of Częstochowa. This symbolic action by Sobieski gave meaning to the battle and approached the conflict at a theological angle. He was able to lead and romanticize the battle as well as the potential victory. The resilience and strategy used by the Husaria under the tactical, theoretical, as well as theological command of Sobieski granted the army a notorious victory. Ultimately, Pope Innocent XI credited the Christian victory over the Ottomans as well as the salvation of the city to the intercession of the Blessed Mother. This pivotal battle marked the beginning of the end of the Ottoman Empire. This moment in history provided the Polish community and its culture with a milestone that they wore as their quote-unquote Medal of Patriotic Valor, especially during the 123-year-old effort to reunite the partitioned country. After years of victorious battles, strong alliances, and profound history, the Commonwealth completely disappeared off the map of Europe by 1795. Ironically, for a country who was no longer recognized by Europe, the three partitions of Poland that were occurring during the time of the Romantic movement. This late 18th century cultural movement affected art, literature, music, theater, and politics. The Romantics became a driving force for the emerging nationalist movement that would come to influence nation building in Europe. The combination of the partitions and Romantic movement brought forth a unique circumstance for Polish citizens, especially for the emerging Polish Romantic artists. Authors like Henryk Sienkiewicz played an integral role in both the Romantic movement as it pertained to remedying any sense of lost Polish patriotism. Sienkiewicz provided the lost nation with a unique form of Romantic nationalism through literature in order to comfort and boost morale of the Poles. Despite feeling lost without his nation, Sienkiewicz continued to publish great literary works highlighting the vibrant patriotism, strong culture, as well as historical milestones that occurred in Poland's history just prior to the annexations. One of which was a volume of a series called Trylogia, or in English, the Trilogy. The first of the books in the series is Ogniem i Mieczem, or With Fire and Sword, which romanticizes the historic events of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth at the peak of the Polish cavalry during the accounts of the Cossacks and Husaria. A political philosopher, Nancy Rosenblum, presents an intellectual phenomenon referred to as the romanticism of warfare, or in other words, romantic militarism. This ideology was developed at the dawn of the French Revolution and as the period of Romanticism reached its peak. Romantics were a revolutionary generation who preached that triumph goes inevitably to spirit rather than efficiency. Romantic militarism aims to make it about the cause in a theoretical way, as opposed to the tactical brutality of war and battle for purely territory. Essentially, this means that war, struggle, or conflict is assumed to have a strategy backed by a cause. With that being said, Rosenblum argues that warfare can be utilized by romantics in order to express the suffering and anguish that is overcome by the expression and exposure of despair. She stresses that despair has to be exposed in order to be overcome, and by one sphere of human action, which in her argument means war. Meaning that war and conflict are ultimately the only ways to conquer any sort of human constraints. In an excerpt from With Fire and Sword, Sienkiewicz writes, "The Poles, though intellectual, sympathetic, brave, and gifted, with high personal qualities that have made them many friends, have been always deficient in collective wisdom. And there's probably no more astonishing antithesis in Europe than the Poles as individuals and the Poles as a people." Here he proves Rosenblum's point in regards to romanticism and conflict, in that he is exposing the pain and conflict as well as claiming that this struggle is the only way that one is able to break free from any sort of oppression. This approach does indeed provide more hope in that it distorts the reality a little bit by proposing that a clash has to occur in order for things to get better. Poles are notorious for having a romantic approach to societal events. That goes to show how vital it is to understand the history, as it plays a role in the identity of an individual and the commonalities that bring people together. To this day, Poles continue to use the Husaria as a defining symbol of the kingdom it once was. This milestone in Poland's history provided for deep roots that ground the Polish culture to this day. One can even find T-shirts, video games, movies, and costumes depicting the winged horsemen. At its peak in 1694, the Commonwealth lands stretched close to 1 million square kilometers, making that the largest territory in Europe with a population of 11 million. This made Poland the third most populous state after Muscovy and France. The tactical and theoretical strategies utilized by the Polish Husaria led to great victory and a reputation that ultimately serves and still continues to serve as an essential tool in encouraging the community, in that they should wear the struggle of the partitions with a sense of pride rather than with embarrassment. Romantic militarism was used as a strategy in order to revive the patriotism and honor through the recognition of the unparalleled cavalry of the Commonwealth. This theory stresses that history builds on itself. Times of despair and helplessness can be seen as a battlefield that provides for the opportunity to reach victory through suffering that ultimately contributes to one's cultural identity and community. Once again, I would like to thank the Kosciuszko Chair for the opportunity to lecture on a topic that I've been really passionate about ever since I can remember. It has been a great honor. So thank you to all those who tuned in on this webinar. I really appreciate your time.
I'd like to thank Bella for joining us today and all of you who tuned in here on Facebook. If you're interested in attending other upcoming webinar events, supporting IWP, or applying to one of our graduate programs, please go to iwp.edu. Again, that's iwp.edu. Thank you.